Hello and welcome. Today we are in the Tier 9 US battleship, the mighty Iowa. We're playing a match on the map Sleeping Giant, and it is entirely Tier 9. I brought out the Iowa because I want to compare her to the Minnesota. The Minnesota is the new American battleship splits Tier 9, the Super Dreadnought. And the Minnesota kind of confuses me because she is... The Iowa is better in virtually every way that you can imagine, except the armor scheme, which means that she eats fewer citadels, and the torpedo protection, which comes from the armor scheme, I guess. In almost every other sense, the Iowa feels like a better ship, and it confuses me because why would you want to play the Minnesota then, if you have the Iowa as a choice? And it's not like the Iowa is considered to be like an overpowered ship or anything, right? The Iowa isn't exactly like the top tier Tier 9 battleship. So, I decided to play her a little bit to see how it feels, and I'm still as confused even after playing a whole bunch of matches. Because the Iowa just, to me, feels better. Come on! Oof! 35k to that Egger just like that. Let's be fair, if I was in a Minnesota, I would have been able to do the same. In fact, I might have actually been able to do something better. I did forget to mention one thing. The Minnesota also has more damage output in one salvo, so the Minnesota might have actually sunk the Egger right there. But here I do need to do a second follow-up to make sure the Egger doesn't get away, because, well, she actually went unspotted right there. I'm glad I fired that salvo. She probably could have survived there, and then healed up again and been a nuisance later in the match. But let's go over some of the ways that the Iowa is better, at least on paper. So, the Iowa is over 10 knots faster than the Minnesota. 34.6 versus 24.2 or something along those lines. Then, the Iowa has better AP penetration. The AP shells go through more armor more easily. Maybe this does mean you get more over penetrations, but I think the difference is going to be rather minor. Then the Iowa has a better Sigma, with the same dispersion at the same ranges, which means that the Iowa should be more accurate, because Sigma is what measures how tightly the shells end up going. So the dispersion is the size of the area that the shells can land in, and the Sigma determines how much they should concentrate into the middle. It's not a big difference, but it's still better, 1.9 versus 1.8. Then, the Iowa also has better DPM. The Minnesota might have 12 guns, but she also has a 40-second reload. Therefore, the Iowa's much shorter reload kind of counteracts that, and the Iowa ends up dealing about 240k PDPM, whereas the Minnesota is 230k. Not a big difference, but it's not an advantage for the Minnesota, at least. Then, the Iowa is also better concealed. She has a 12.7 kilometer concealment compared to the Minnesota's like 13.7 or 13.8. That's actually a pretty big stealth difference. I mean, that would be almost as big of a difference as just dropping Concealment Expert or the Concealment Upgrade. It's something quite big, especially when you consider that ships like the Venezia, that's a cruiser, has a 12.4 kilometer concealment range. If you're in an Iowa and you have to fight the Venezia, well, when you make contact or you get spotted, you know that the Venezia is very close, whereas with the Minnesota, that's not the case. The Venezia can play around the concealment of a Minnesota, but not the concealment of an Iowa. So I think that's actually a pretty sizable advantage for the Iowa. Then, the Iowa also has a better heal, on top of having more HP, of course, but the HP advantage is only like 3000. But she does have a better heal. The Iowa heals about 24,000 more HP across all the heals combined than the Minnesota does. So we're talking about 4,500, 4,400 more HP per heal used. It's a pretty big difference. And then, let's not forget that the Iowa also has a sister ship, the Missouri, right? The Missouri doesn't have the improved heal, but she has an actual radar. So, you know, it kind of feels odd that the Minnesota exists the way she does. Because it's not like, again, the Iowa isn't exactly like an overpowered battleship or anything. So feels really weird. But then again, you can't really discount how big of an advantage a better armor scheme can be, right? Think of the Kremlin. Kremlin has a very good armor scheme. She ends up being very difficult to take out quickly as a result. Now, there are other advantages to that ship, but the armor scheme is at least one of them. And the Minnesota's armor is, at least the armor scheme, is significantly better, except when she shows broadside and you fire AP at her. In those cases, there's no. There isn't much of a difference. In fact, the Iowa might actually end up being slightly better, but against HE spam, well, Minnesota might be slightly better, not by much though. Okay, so here I have been basically playing cautiously, because when you're a fast battleship, and the Iowa is a very fast battleship, she's actually one of the fastest battleships in the game. Sure, she's not as fast as a Georgia, for example. However, she is really fast. She's faster than a whole bunch of the French battleships, even when they use speed boost. So that's quite something. Obviously, speed boost has some other advantages, such as faster acceleration and deceleration, but it's still a very fast battleship, and therefore you can end up overextending very easily. So I tried to play a bit more cautiously in the Iowa. Now, in the Minnesota, you would obviously do the same thing, but it's not because you choose to play more cautiously, it's just that your ship is so slow that you can't do anything else. So, we got this cap zone, we controlled 3 of the 4 cap zones, we actually have a numerical advantage, 10 versus 8 ships, and that just means that we have to be somewhat defensive. If we can set up a better crossfire to be able to defend the caps that we have, then even better for us. We probably shouldn't try to defend the A-cap, because, I mean, the enemy has a very, very big numerical advantage over there. However, I do want to go more over here so that I have more options. Like, I can go into the middle from here, I can sit behind an island if necessary, and do all kinds of things like that. Okay, so I can't arc over this island anymore, but neither can the Minnesota. Look. Island armor overpowered, please nerf. No, actually, please don't nerf island armor, okay? I need island armor. Running aground here is fine, because I wanted to stop here anyway. Because going forward, out of the gap, is a mistake. I will open broadside to the A-cap, and they have a Georgia there, and then Alaska. Obviously, they could punish me. Sure, the Iowa does have a citadel that sits low in the water, and it's unlikely that you will get more than 1 or 2 citadels against her, but it's still possible, and even that kind of damage would add up, and I don't want to give the enemy any kind of advantages that they don't really need to get. Here I'm just going to go back and forth a little bit, you know, exchange some shell fire with the Minnesota, hopefully doing it in a way where she can't actually fire back at me. Because that's possible, right? Because she is behind an island, except not right now, because she can arc over the island. But I should be angled enough that it's unlikely I will lose too much HP here. Ooh, is that Riga just sailing in a straight line, and only in a straight line? Oh, maybe we can get a lucky salvo here. Some of them did hit the mountain, but it's okay, or rock. Okay. 3 over penetrations. Interesting. Oh, Georgia's pushing. Oh, that's actually even better. And she's broadside. We might actually be able to punish her. Now, Georgia has, I think, the same armor as the Iowa. And when I say the same, I mean like exactly the same. Or at least so incredibly similar that it's virtually the same. Okay, 4,000 damage. That's... I was expecting slightly more than that there. Significantly more, actually. But it's fine, it's a 9 versus 7 right now, so we're still alright. And I mean, they have to attack into us, because we held the A-cap for a while, and we have a ship's advantage, so we have a sizable 300 points lead. Oh, a broadside Drake. Oh yes, give me those citadels, give me those citadels. What? What just happened? Like, what? A broadside Drake at less than 10 kilometers. I fire my guns and I get 1 over penetration worth of damage? What? I mean, only 2 of those shells actually even hit. What is this American dispersion? This is not going so well, is it? Wow, and the follow-up for another 1 over penetration. In fact, I have as many over penetrations as actual penetrations. What is going on? Wow, I am having a lot of trouble dealing damage, and let's be honest, the Minnesota should be exactly in the same boat here. Like, if I were in the Minnesota, some of those over penetrations might have been penetrations though, so there's that, because she has less penetration. But some of them some of the penetrations might have simply been ricochets. Oh, finally a Citadel, excellent. But now there is Nudala in front of me, a destroyer. And unfortunately I do not have a Hydro. So I can't actually go forward like I initially planned, I have to reverse away here. But I'm gonna take a shot on that Udalai. I don't know how she's gonna turn, this salvo probably isn't going to do much. Oh, and Iowa is pushing the same way as the Georgia was. I did more damage to that Udaloi than when the Drake was closer and showing broadside to me. I had to fire 2 salvos on that Drake to deal the same damage that I did to this Udaloi. Unbelievable. But anyway, there's a broadside Iowa over there. Oh, my rear turret can't fire. The angle just barely got too bad. But my front turret should be enough to finish her off. Just in case, you know, maybe she gets away too. Okay, so now we're actually in a 6 versus 5. We held such an advantage for a while, and then we kinda gave it all away. Interesting. Really interesting. But anyway, now it's going to be a fight with an Alaska. Now, an Alaska is actually kinda dangerous, especially at 10 kilometers, because she does have the improved AP angles. However, she's still a cruiser, a super cruiser maybe, with very big guns, but still a cruiser, and she should not be able to Citadel me, at least if I angle like this. She will be able to deal penetration damage, but not Citadels. Now I can't really angle against the Alaska in a way where she can't get penetration damage, because that would open my broadside too much to the Georgia. And so essentially I'm going to sit right here, go back and forth a little bit. My aim is mostly into the bow and the upper side armor of the Alaska, just to get penetration damage, because I can't Citadel her from here either. And just wait, because we have an Iowa, an Izumo, and some an Ibuki in the northern area, so eventually they will come join us. Torpedoes by the Udaloi, but I'm already reversing away, so it shouldn't matter too much, although I might eat the flood here. Nope, just 10k damage. I am down to 14k, so that is somewhat dangerous. I should probably reverse away, but... well, it's a 6 versus 4, not really the most important thing. I do have a heal up in 30 seconds. I'm still being spotted by the Udaloi. That is somewhat unfortunate. But I'll just keep going back and forth, and hopefully make the salvos of the Alaska work like they are. Torpedoes, but they don't reach. Okay. I mean, the Alaska is doing about 6-7k per salvo, but we're doing about the same in return. And I mean, not every salvo is massive. It could be much worse. Oh, heal. Excellent. I'm going to accelerate to try to avoid being shot at by the Alaska. By the way, if you're wondering, how do I accelerate this quickly in a big, strong, heavy battleship? That's because I have the propulsion mod. And I think the propulsion mod is incredibly useful, particularly for situations like this. I was firing again. Okay, I have 11k HP. Well, slightly more than 11k. I think it's 13. I can't actually read the number here. Okay, it is 13. I think it's gonna be a draw. Because I'm only going to get one more salvo, and then the Alaska is going to sink me. So I'm gonna try to get all of my guns on target, and hope that this is enough to sink the Alaska. But even if it isn't, the Iowa and the Ibuki will finish her off anyway. Nope, it wasn't actually enough. That is somewhat unfortunate, but hey. 5 versus 4. 920 or 930 points to 700. And yeah, this duel with the Alaska, it hasn't been the greatest. My guns weren't exactly on point, but they were okay. They were much worse earlier on though. Like, I really should have deleted that Drake, or at least dealt significant damage in one of those salvos. Unfortunately I didn't, but then again the game's over. We're at 988 points, 992, 2 more ticks and it's over. Capping wins games apparently. So, 151k damage, sank 3 ships, got 2000 base XP. Pretty damn good game. And my team played pretty well, and I mean the enemy wasn't like an entire pushover either, but I think the caps gave us the advantage. Did take a lot of damage this game, and fighting that Alaska was kinda hard, 28 shell hits, whereas the Alaska did 32 to me. I did significantly more damage, but then again I am a battleship, so that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, in a bit I'm going to compare the Minnesota and the Iowa in port in terms of armor, but first, I'd like to go back to this situation here. I mean, forget what I'm doing right here, right? I sink the agate, etc., but look at the minimap, right? Look at the decap in particular. We have a Z-46 in the decap, a German destroyer that has a hydroacoustic search. The enemy has a Fletcher in that cap. Now, the enemy has some support. She has a Sovietsky Soyuz, a Minnesota, and a Riga far off on the side, whose radar probably cannot reach the beak or the decap. Now, the Z-46 here has the support of a Riga, a Jeanbart, an Iowa, a Seattle, another Iowa, and I think an Ibuki. What does our Z-46 decide to do? She sails out of the cap zone. And I'm not showing this to shame him. I want to make sure that if you're that Z-46, that you don't make the same mistake. Because what that Z-46 should be doing is she should be using her hydro and then using the islands in the cap, just move closer to that Fletcher. Spot the Fletcher, maybe somebody else takes shots at her, maybe the Fletcher herself will try to run away, leave the cap, whatever. You can also utilize your smokescreen combined with the hydro to be able to outfight the Fletcher. Do things, because this should be our cap right there. We have so many more ships over here than the enemy does, that there is absolutely no reason that the enemy takes the cap. And even if this was an even number of ships on both sides, we have the Z-46. One of her greatest strengths is the hydro that she brings to this. And she could use that hydro here to easily take that cap. And I really urge you guys, look at the situation before you leave the cap. So, let's take a look at the commander skills and upgrades that I used on the Iowa. So, I start out with, in this specific order, Priority Target, Expert Marksman, Superintendent, then Concealment Expert. So, I want to clarify that I say this specific order because if you don't have a 19-point captain, this is the order I would take the skills in. I would essentially always take Concealment Expert as my 10-point skill. Next up, Adrenaline Rush, then Fire Prevention, and last, Basics of Survivability. I mentioned this because people sometimes ask me what 10-point skill they should take. And I think the answer is almost always going to be Concealment Expert on almost every ship. I mean, there are a handful of exceptions obviously, but Concealment Expert is just such a good skill to have, and even on the exceptions, it's always very nice to have as a skill. So you can basically never go wrong taking Concealment Expert as your 10-point skill. It is just that good, because Concealment allows you to do things you can't normally do. You can get out of situations that you normally would have taken a lot of damage in unscathed, you can surprise the enemy better, you can go around islands better, all these kinds of things, and Concealment Expert helps you in virtually every aspect of the game. So this is why I heavily recommend taking Concealment Expert as your 10-point skill. So, to clarify, if I only had 10 points, I would take Priority Target, Expert Marksman, Superintendent, and then Concealment Expert. And if I had 12 points, I would then put on Adrenaline Rush, and after that, Fire Prevention and Basics of Survivability. So, let's go to the upgrades now. In the last slot, I used the Dispersion upgrade that the American battleships get, but honestly, considering what kinds of accuracy I'm getting, maybe Reload is just better. Fire more shells, because it seems like they don't hit anyway, or it's RNG whether I hit or not. But I'm not sure which one to go for. Next up, I use the concealment upgrade, because again, concealment is amazingly powerful. So, in the 4th slot, I use the propulsion modification 1. I think this is a very, 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 very powerful upgrade to have, especially when you do stop and go maneuvers as a battleship, because this upgrade allows you to go from 0 knots to 10 knots very quickly, compared to normally, and this can make a huge difference when you're standing still and need to dodge torpedoes or anything like that. Battleships tend to be rather sluggish in this section of the speed up, but this upgrade allows you to do it faster, and I think because of that it's so powerful, in fact, that I forgo damage control system modification 2 and instead take basics of survivability. This is the reason I take basics of survivability. If I didn't have, or if I went for damage control, I would take jack of all trades and expert loader. But I think this propulsion mod is so powerful. I mean, you saw it in the game. I went back and forth a little bit when I was roughly standing still, and it's all thanks to this skill that I was able to do it the way I did. 3rd slot, I use the turret traverse upgrade, mostly because I don't know what to take here. Normally on a battleship I would take the dispersion upgrade, but because the Americans have it in the last slot, I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, on the Minnesota you would probably go for the range upgrade because she's slow, right? But on the Iowa, you don't really need it. I mean, you already have 23.3 kilometer range, you have a scout plane, and the thing is that if you have 28 plus kilometer range, which this will put you at, whenever you fire your guns, your bloom will go out to 28 kilometers, which means that sometimes it can actually be a disadvantage rather than an advantage, because you'll be spotted in a situation where you normally wouldn't be. And so I don't think the range upgrade just makes that much sense. And neither do the other two, to be honest. So turret traverse it is. 2nd slot, damage control system modification 1, because obviously more fires, floodings, etc., and your engine just so rarely gets broken. And in the 1st slot, main arms modification 1. I don't really know if you need this. Maybe going for auxiliary is better, because your anti-air and secondaries will survive more, but I don't know. Actually, one other choice you could make on the Americans is taking this upgrade. Damage control party modification 1. Now, I don't know if it's a good idea, but think about it. Your damage control party already lasts 20 seconds on the American battleships. If you take that, it would last 28 seconds. That's 28 seconds that you cannot be set on fire or cause the flooding on or anything else. It's quite something, but I don't really know whether it's worth it. Maybe, maybe not. Anyway, that's the skills I use, and kind of like them on the Iowa. I virtually use the same on the Minnesota, except I take the range upgrade. So, let's now compare the Iowa and the Minnesota. The first thing, or the main thing the Minnesota has over the Iowa is the armor. Right, so let's go over the Iowa's armor. So you have a 32mm bow, 32mm stern, 38mm upper belt, or upper side armor, and then 38mm deck armor. Then you have a torpedo protection belt, sorry, this one, which is 32mm, and the citadel sits low in the water. It sits basically on the waterline. It's a 297mm armor plate, and this effectively means that if the Iowa shows broadside, you can citadel her. However, you have to rely on quite a lot of luck. Well, not to get one citadel, but to get more than one. Because your shells probably are going to RNG all over the place, and most of them are just going to fall above the citadel area. Which means that you probably won't get nearly as many citadels when an Iowa is showing broadside to you than you would if a Yamato would show broadside to you. So a healthy Iowa can show broadside at close range and mostly survive this, whereas a Yamato or a Kremlin, for example, can't really do that. And it's all because the citadel just sits that low in the water. It's not because the armor is amazing or anything, no, it's just because it sits so low in the water. So, let's take a look at the armor plate or armor of the Minnesota. Now, actually first on the Iowa, I'd like to mention that when an Iowa does show broadside, when you fire AP at this, you can just rack up damage, just like against a GK, etc. So, it's fairly good, but it's not like amazing because the Iowa isn't nearly as large as the GK. And the Minnesota suffers from the same problem, except much worse. You see, when they were building the Petropavlovsk, right? they didn't have enough freeboard because they needed all of that freeboard to make this ship. Look at how high this is. Look at how high this is. All of this is just flat, and when you fire AP at it, you will get your penetrations. Probably. Because this is just 38mm. This is the torpedo protection belt, by the way. Even up here, it's the torpedo protection belt. But behind it is another 38mm armor plate, so that's all you have to penetrate to deal damage. And most AP can probably go through this. Next, the Minnesota still has a 32mm bow, as usual, and the 32mm stern. However, because the torpedo protection belt actually reaches quite far, it is 38mm, so you are more protected against ships like Yamatos, but not entirely, of course. You also have a 38mm deck armor, and because of the massive side armor, you are actually very resistant to a lot of HE spam. But then again, so is the Iowa, because she also has a 38mm deck and side armor plate. However, the main advantage actually comes from the Citadel, because this sits slightly lower in the water, or at least it appears that the Citadel sits slightly lower in the water. But it's not that big of a difference, right, compared to the Iowa? And it's actually only 86mm, so what gives? How would this be good armor? Well, because... look at this, look at where the Citadel starts, and look at where the ship's edge is. Look at that massive difference, right? Compare this to the Iowa. It's like a tiny gap on the Iowa, right? But on the Minnesota, that's a massive, massive, massive gap. And because of that, imagine your shell comes in, right? It doesn't like go on the waterline and then hit the Citadel. No, it'll fall from over there, and then it hits the Citadel, right? So it penetrates like over here, and then it just goes there. And now let's add back this armor plate. Shell arrives, it goes through that, and then it has to go through this 343mm armor plate. And once it goes through that, it has a chance of hitting the Citadel, so either the Citadel deck or the side. And because of this, the Minnesota is much more resistant to AP. Also, I'd like to mention that even this isn't actually at the edge of the ship. You would have to, go through this side plate as well. This massive torpedo protection belt. And so the Minnesota, especially at medium, long, and close range, should be much more resistant to AP when she's showing broadside, when it comes to getting Citadel hits, of course. And that's a very nice thing to have, to know that you can show broadside and most likely just get away with basically no punishment. It's very, very, very useful to have, but then again, considering how slow the ship is, she probably needs that. On top of that, it's 343mm, which is much thicker, and then add on the 86 or the 32 on the deck. So you have to have much more pen as well. But obviously regular penetrations on the side will just work fine. On top of that, look at this ginormous superstructure. Yeah. So HE spam, the giant deck, is no problem unless you're talking Yoshinos, etc., in which case you really do not wish to be the ship. But again, and Citadels are also fine, but it's the massive freeboard that's the problem on the Minnesota. However, she does get an amazing torpedo protection belt, 40% compared this to the Iowa's 25%, so it's a sizable advantage, but honestly, I don't know if it's enough, because again, you're behind in so many other aspects. You're behind in damage per minute numbers, because of the long reload. You have worse AP penetrations, you have a worse Sigma, you have the same dispersion, you have roughly better anti-air if your defensive you have better anti-air if your defensive fire is up, but if it's not, then Iowa actually has better. You're over 10 knots slower, you have a 1 kilometer worse concealment range, you have less maximum HP, your heal is significantly worse. I mean, look at this, 457? Compare this to the Iowa's 625. We're talking like a 23,000 HP difference if you use all heals, and then add on the 3,000 base HP difference as well. and the Iowa can tank a good over 25k more damage than the Minnesota can. So yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel like it's enough on the Minnesota. I mean, there's one upside though on the Minnesota. You get this amazing camouflage, right? I mean, look at this. Look at how much bling this camo has. It's gold. And it's pretty and it's not rusty, which is a lot more than you can say for the Iowa, for example, right? Look at this rust bucket. But then, if you played for a long time, you might have the Missouri, which has a really cool camo as well, and it has many of the same advantages the Iowa has except the heel, but you get a radar, so probably still better to go with the Missouri. However, yeah, I don't know, the Minnesota just doesn't feel worth it. She makes too many trade-offs for the better armor scheme, better torpedo protection belt, and I guess more shells when you fire at once. And it honestly just doesn't feel worth it. Well, and maybe the camo makes it worth it. But what happens if they release a camo like this for the Iowa? Well, then Minnesota has nothing at all, doesn't she? Well, anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I would like to thank the patrons and patron. Thank you very much for your continued support, and I hope I'll see you guys next time.